Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Welcome to the fourth day of the European Youth Conference here in Alicante. We know that yesterday was a good night. You might be a little bit tired, but we hope that you really enjoyed. Just to me, being Spanish, it was a great representation of how we usually do with live music, because there were a lot of different types of live music that you could see were very typical from what we typically do. It's just in our soul, I think. So we hope that you enjoy this part of what we are and that you are ready to start today another great day of working and conclusions.
I would also like to have a special welcome to our new guests. As you know, the DGs are joining us, as well as some new representatives of the European Commission, the Council Secretariat, OECD, and representatives of the European Economic and Social Committee. And today we are looking forward to having discussions with you. And I know we didn't start on time, and maybe you will think, oh, the delegates are so unreliable. But no, I have to tell you, they have been working so hard the past few days, and it's their fourth conference day already. And as Kova just said, we had a great night. So sometimes, that can happen that a little delay takes place. But we are not in a rush today. We still have a lot of time to engage in dialogue, to get to know the outcomes of the conference, and of course, to also celebrate the closing of the conference. Just for the delegates, we have introduced it before, but there is one day of overlap. So the DGs are, of course, also here to join for the conference, but they are also here to have their own separate meeting where they will be discussing issues around youth participation as well as youth inclusion. And I had a quick look at the agenda of the DG meeting, and I think it connects quite well to the discussions which we had today. So please, if you engage in dialogue today, look for things you have in common, for things that interest you during these days, and try to connect the discussions of the conference really with the discussions that the DGs will initiate and start from today on. Some people who are joining are maybe not yet familiar with the EU Youth Conference. I know that most people in the room are experts, but we also, again, have the streaming. So maybe people from the outside are joining and they are wondering what is actually happening here, what is the context of this conference. And to maybe introduce you a little bit to the context, we have something prepared for you. Actually, the current trio presidency has something prepared for you. To celebrate the 10th cycle, the trio Spain, Belgium, and Hungary, they have committed to really include more diverse voices and young people, and that also means that education and empowerment is part of that. So besides the inclusion toolkit, which was presented during the conference, they have also prepared a series of educational materials around the EU Youth Dialogue. And to give you a little sneak peek on what they look like, we would now like to share a teaser video with you to introduce you to the EU Youth Dialogue. So let's take a look at the video.
As young people, we have the power to shape the European Union's future. The European Youth Dialogue is all about bridging the gap between young people and policymakers. It offers us a unique opportunity to make political decision makers aware of what truly matters to us. Every European Youth Dialogue takes place under a trio presidency, with 3 countries chairing the Council of the European Union over an 18-month cycle. These countries take it in turns to organise a European Youth Conference, where we meet and debate on the chosen topics for the European Youth Dialogue. During each cycle, we, young Europeans, are first consulted, making sure there is a wide range of perspectives. Next, we discuss the results and make recommendations for European Union and member state policies. So let's take the opportunity to voice our views and help shape European societies. Because the best future for Europe is one in which we can engage, connect, and empower youth.
A if you are involved in the EU Youth Dialogue, and since you are here, I believe most of you are, you know that this is a very complex mechanism. So to have videos like that summarize such a complex process in such a very short amount of time is, I think, quite great. So thank you again to the Trio Presidency for not just providing this video, but actually a series of videos that will launch throughout the cycle that help people to better understand what the EU Youth Dialogue is. We are focusing in this cycle, which is the anniversary cycle, on youth goal number 3 on an inclusive societies. So we want to discuss how we can actually include all young people in the discussions of shaping European but also national policies. And I told you the delegates have already been working quite hard. They have identified barriers to inclusion, but they have also come up with ideas and recommendations on all levels how we could all contribute to more inclusive societies. And to introduce you to some of the conference outcomes, I would now like to invite Andra Sparta, one of the 2 European researchers on stage, who has prepared last night, actually, because, I mean, it's just the 3rd conference day, the final presentation of concluding this conference and sharing some of the outcomes with you. So please, Andras, join us on stage.
I'm here today to, could I please have my presentation? I'm here today to, because there has been this wonderful, wonderful introduction as to what the EU Youth Dialogue is. And I am here today to, especially to those of you who have not been over these past few days, to introduce and to summarize what has happened, both in terms of process and most notably also in terms of outcomes, so that we are all on the same page, and then we can go on into debating with each other and to elaborating on what we want to talk about when it comes to inclusion. So, first things first, who am I? Some of the youth delegates already know that I'm a youth researcher who researches by researching the research. You can try to use that as an opener when you go to the talking stations later on. I'm pretty sure that the young people will be glad to shed some light into this tongue twister. And I'm also a consultant, and what I do is, one of the things that I focus on is to actually try to help methodology, try to use the methodology to help voices of young people to actually be heard. And that is also the position from which I'm speaking to you today. And I will first showcase what happened here at the EU Youth Conference in Alicante, and then we'll have a look at some outcomes. So, the EU Youth Conference in Alicante is supposed to serve and serves as a major European level consultation event. What it means that young people come here, come to Alicante, debate, and come to certain conclusions which are then taken on board during the consultation process, which now takes place all over Europe. How that happened? It happened during working groups, and I am also pretty sure that if you ask the youth delegates, they will tell you that these working groups were rather short in their view, but also very intense, and that they would be also very happy to even continue developing the outcomes and working in the working groups, and that I also think that they quite enjoyed it. Who are the youth delegates and ministerial delegates that we have here at the conference? I'm a researcher, so I can't help it. I need to have some numbers. So what we did is we offered an option to our participants that they can fill in an anonymous survey so that we know a bit better as to who is actually sitting around the table. And among other things, we also asked this a bit private question. Have you been a victim of hate speech? And this green thingy up here is yes, and that yes is 30% of the responses. So 30% of the youth delegates and ministerial delegates who have been talking about inclusion over these past few days have actually themselves had some experience of hate speech. We also asked about discrimination, and in that case, again, it's this green one over there. So 43.7% of the youth delegates or the ministerial delegates have some experience with discrimination. Now we'll let this settle in for a bit, because you know that the topic of the working groups is and was inclusion. And I think it is actually really interesting to see that young people who came here have a first-hand experience of not being included in some cases. I've got another number for you, 88%. Can anyone guess what this might be? Come on, let's take some guesses. I mean, it's a morning, I know you had your coffee, your breakfast. What? Age. Okay, it can be one of the age groups. What else it could be? 88%. 88%. You have noticed, especially those of you who have been here for over the last few days, you have noticed that the weather outside has been rather nice. There is also a beach outside, if you haven't noticed. And there was some concern that we might not have some participants during some of the sessions because the weather, it was just so tempting. 88% of the people have attended all of the working group sessions. And I think that is a pretty good result, given that the weather was so damn good. All right, let's move on from who is here to what was discussed. So we had 3 guiding questions. First of them focused on barriers. So it read, what are the current barriers to the full inclusion of all young people in society, especially young people with fewer opportunities? The second question focused on the current support. So what sort of effective support is currently being given to enable the full inclusion of all young people in society, especially young people with fewer opportunities? And the last question focused on changes that we need. So what further actions need to be taken to enable the inclusion of all young people in society, especially young people with fewer opportunities? So these were the guiding questions that were debated in the working groups and that the young people and the ministerial delegates have been working together to resolve. Do you think we have any outcomes? Oh, that's quite weak, isn't it? So do we have any outcomes? Yes, we do. So let me take them one by one, and this is really just a summary. The outcomes are actually in form of bullet points, and these will be shared after the conference. They will be part of the conference report, so no worries. You will have the full transcript as to what are the outcomes of the working groups, but we thought it would be nice to have some sort of summary, looking at all of them, which I did last night, seeing where there's some overlaps and what are the, let's say, most pressing messages that the young people wanted to convey. So, first, barriers. There are missing connections, and these missing connections can occur in different contexts. So it can be connections between generations. It can be connections in terms of geography, so urban-rural connections. It can also be, which I find really interesting, cognitive connections. Cognitive connections, young people thought, is that there can be, let's say, a disagreement between how young people would think or approach a certain matter, and then how the rest of the society thinks that it should be approached. And then sometimes it's not about having the right or wrong answer, but it's simply about being able to approach a certain matter in a certain way. So it's this cognitive connection. Another barrier that the working groups identified was lack of resources. So finances, housing, skills, but also information. Information is vital for any societal process to take place, and if we do not have information reaching young people, then that's a huge barrier for them. Lack of recognition was another one, and that again is happening on different levels. So we can have lack of recognition when it comes to competences, competences which are gained through different ways. Also, in terms of youth field professions, for instance, not all youth field professionals are recognized in all countries, and so on and so forth. Are these new problems? No. We have known about those for some time, but young people are also aware of them very much. Then there are obstacles in access, and again, it can be access to education, infrastructure, and again, information. I mean, if we do not have clear access to information, to youth-friendly information, then there can't be any inclusion, because young people still simply don't know what there is that they can actually turn to. What are the services? What are the points where they can turn? Another barrier is lack of initiatives to tackle exclusion, and this is actually, to me, quite a worrying point, that young people themselves would see that simply the states, or even the European Union, or even the regions, or even the local authorities could actually do much more than they are doing, and they feel that the initiatives that would actually help them to really participate, and especially young people from different backgrounds, to participate actively on society, that the initiatives are simply lacking, that they are not there. And, of course, lack of diversity. What do young people mean by that? They say, we go to schools, and most often, it's the majority, it's people who we just meet all the time that create this sense of society around us. But how can we have a sense of diversity when quite often we just don't meet people from different backgrounds? We do not meet people from rural areas. We do not meet people from different minority backgrounds. And how is that possible? We want to meet them. We want to be able to include them in our daily lives. Then also a digital divide. Digital divide is a concept which basically postulates that there are people who have access to technology, and then there's people who do not. And that creates a huge divide. It creates a huge inclusion criteria or exclusion criteria for young people. And young people are very much aware of that, not only in terms of hardware, so to have a smartphone or not to have a smartphone, but also in terms of having access to certain software. Some young people are happy with having all sorts of access, and some young people simply just do not have that privilege. Young people and the working groups debated necessary changes as well. So, first necessary change, which was mentioned several times in the outcomes of the working groups, was youth policy mainstreaming. What it means is young people would like inclusion of young people to be actually present in policies across the board, not only in the youth policies, but also in policies which focus primarily on different areas. And young people were, and the members of the working groups were quite specific about that. It's also about including young people in youth policy design, implementation, and evaluation. Again, the working groups were very clear about that, so you see that it is really, there is time to include young people not only in consultations, but to include them throughout the policy process, so that they really feel like they have a say, like they can help, like they can use the expertise that they have. And also, when it comes to youth policy, it should be evidence-based, co-managed, and cross-sectoral. And it's, again, I mean, these are quite strong words. You see that these working groups worked really hard, and that their outcomes are really based in the current political debates and policy debates. Another necessary change that was mentioned would be the universal income. The working group members would say, well, when a young people turns 16 or 18, shouldn't they be supported also so that the danger of exclusion actually drops to the bare minimum? And couldn't the universal income actually be the way forward? We do have studies which show that universal income works, so why don't we have it already? We also, of course, have mentioned funding, because that's only at the first place, as they say. And funding related specifically to mental health care and physical health care, public transport, housing, infrastructure, NGOs, and there were quite a few other domains. And the interesting part about this funding argument was that young people felt that when you actually improve funding in these different areas, then you improve inclusion as well, because you improve the level of access, you improve the quality of these services, and then the inclusion increases as well. Outreach structures, especially those which would use the expertise of young people, is something that the working groups were calling for. So to be able to actually get to those young people who need help, who need support, and to get there in such a way so that it's youth-friendly and so that it doesn't scare people further away. Comprehensive education, including non-formal learning and including for educators. There's going to be some snippets of conversations later on in my presentation, and this was actually quite a strong argument. Was, okay, I mean, education, that is one of the areas where we really want more support, but also we want our educators to have support. We want our educators to know how it's done, how the inclusion is actually implemented in the classroom and beyond the classroom in the non-formal learning setting and so forth. And also, there was quite a few bullet points on fighting misinformation and disinformation. Young people and the members of the working groups are very much aware of the world that we are living in, the world in which somehow truth becomes twisted at times, and it gets to a public space, and then it influences the public debate, and especially when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to marginalized young people with fewer opportunities, misinformation and disinformation can really hurt young people. So they would really like for this to be tackled. I mentioned the digital divide as one of the barriers earlier on, and of course, to tackle the digital divide and also the digital competence development divide, that is something that the working group members agreed that is very much needed. The digital divide itself I explained, but digital competence development divide is a similar thing, only we are not talking about hardware or software, but we're talking about the ability to operate software and hardware of choice. There is this notion that young people are so-called digital natives. Recently, this has been somehow, there's been some doubt shed on this concept. So it's not as if young people are born with the smartphone in their hands. They also would like to have some support in that, and especially they see that young people from marginalized background really need this support to also get the skills there. Improve access. Access to what? Mental health care has been mentioned quite a few times. I suppose all of you, as you're sitting here, know that mental health is quite a topic at the European level, but also at the level of the member states. And the participants of our working groups very well know that, and they would like the access to these services to be improved so that these services do not need to be accessed only in big cities, and so that the young people don't have to wait 6 months to actually get an appointment. Transparency of the social media algorithms is another thing that needs to change according to our working group participants. What does it mean? Social media platforms have appeared, they have entered our lives, and they are here apparently to stay. And if they are here to stay, then young people feel that it would be only fair if we knew how these platforms actually operate, and also with respect how information is distributed in these networks and in these platforms. And that it's really important to also have it with respect to the inclusion, to see what sort of information is given to whom. Also, there was a call for EU-wide standards for public transportation. Public transportation is one of mechanisms of inclusion. To have access, to be able to move around is one of the basic needs of not only young people these days. And it seems like perhaps it would be a good idea to have like one common ground, one common approach to public transportation in the EU. Now, we also had some talk on how the youth field itself could contribute to these changes, because you have seen that a lot of what was mentioned is actually cross-sectoral issues. And I will just give you a few snippets from these conversations. So one of the participants said, youth workers and educators should be aware of intersectionality when tackling inclusion. Intersectionality is a concept where a young person or any person can actually have several disadvantages at the same time. I can be a Roma person, I can also be a woman, and I can also have a different sexual orientation than a majority. And that puts additional pressure on me as a person. So that's a concept of intersectionality. And some participants around here felt that it would really be nice if youth workers and educators and also other stakeholders would know what it means and how to tackle it. We need to first educate the educators, I heard around here. And I think it's very true, isn't it? I mean, when we want to change the educational system, when we want to change or support youth work and non-formal learning, then the educators are the ones who need to be receiving our attention first. Then another quote, I come from a minority and we fought for participation, but it is not our task to fight. It is the task of the structure to include everyone. And I think this quote somehow says it all. At times we approach inclusion as we are helping everyone to participate in the society, but shouldn't perhaps the society and its structures be also twisted and changed so that, and adjusted so that they enable young people and not only young people to participate without any special support? What's the next steps? What happens with all of this? All of this will be verbatim, word by word, put into the conference report, and this conference report will then be analyzed all together with all the national working groups' reports to create the consultation report at the end of this consultation phase. What it means is that all of what you saw in here, what you heard in here, and what you can also read then in the report as full bullet points, will be included, will be taken on board when we put together the consultation report, and will be then put forth to the European Steering Group and to relevant policy stakeholders. And I think we should be proud of the conference participants, and I think they deserve to be appreciated. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you very much, Andras, for this great and concise presentation. And as you can see, there has been a lot of discussion behind all of these outcomes. So I think you put them very well to the point, but still we encourage you to, first of all, talk to the dialogues, get to know how they got to these conclusions, but of course to also later look at the conference report and of course the consultation report. Because the guiding questions you introduced, they are not just being discussed here at the conference, but actually young people and also stakeholders all over Europe are going to discuss these guiding questions during the consultation phase of the cycle. Before we move on to the dialogue, because now you've heard what the conference has been all about, but we want to think about what's coming next. And Andras, please don't leave yet. We want to hear about what's coming next. But before I will tell you about the methodology on how we will engage in dialogue, I would actually like to give the possibility to ask questions, to clarify something, to raise something. I don't want to dive into discussions about the conference outcomes because we will have quite a lot of time to do that in the next format. But I would just like to open the floor if anybody would like to share something in plenary here before we continue. Is there somebody who would like to say something? Then please raise your hand and Kova will come to you. Would be great if you could stand up, share your name, and also which organization or delegation you're representing.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Dimitar. I'm from the Bulgarian youth delegation. I'm here also representing the National Youth Council of Bulgaria. My question here is to kind of like try to understand better what the goal of these conferences really is. Because it seems like what it should be by what we've seen so far, what is by theory, this should be the place where we think about and create a common basis for the consultation phase. However, this felt like a big consultation event, which thinking about all the people that we are supposed to be representing, I don't think it's fair for them, considering that we haven't had the chance yet to actually talk with them about this issue. Moving forward, how can we actually try and better put into perspective what the dialogue is about, like how the conferences look like, and how we can create a common idea of what the goal of these conferences and the whole dialogue is. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Both of them are very relevant. I will start with the latter one, with the second one. You might know that one of the goals of this particular cycle is also to have a look back, because this is the 10th cycle of the EU Youth Dialogue. So there is a nice opportunity and a good moment to take stock, to have a look back and to see what has been done and has not been done, and to also put forward some perhaps suggestions or recommendations as to how we can do this in a different, hopefully better way. So that remains, I mean, concrete recommendations remain to be seen, because this debate is only just about to start. It is to some extent happening during every cycle and at the end of every cycle. I think this is going to be even a bit more special. And I think especially if there's concrete suggestions that you would have as the youth delegations, I would say do not be shy to share them with your own representatives, especially with your own DGs. I mean, they're sitting right here next to you, so use the opportunity. And when it comes to the different roles of different EU Youth Conferences, that is definitely the case. Each EU Youth Conference is unique. Each EU Youth Conference has got several objectives, and those objectives are defined at the beginning, and those are the ones where then the program and the methodology is modeled so that we get to the objectives. Sometimes it would be to gain concrete recommendations which would then stem to policy documents. Sometimes it would be different to set the stage for the national consultations, and sometimes, just like in this event, we would simply have, it's not that simple, but we would simply have a huge consultation event, and we would simply rely on your expertise, not only as youth delegates, but also as people who are young yourselves, who are in touch with different youth organizations, and who are also very much have been debating some of these topics for literally years, to come and to tell us your opinions, and then to take it into account together with the national report. So this is yet another option to contribute to the consultations. It's not like we are excluding some other consultations. This is an additional consultation, so it's on top of all.
And of course, to highlight also what's special about this conference is that we are actually having European discussions. We are having a European perspective. Of course, you are coming from your delegations with your member states' experiences and so on. You have been prepared by your national working groups, by your national youth councils, by your ministries, depending on what your role is. But usually the delegations mainly also take place on several other levels, like national level, regional level, local level. But having such a huge European consultation moment, I think that's quite special for this cycle also, and a great opportunity to together discuss these things, and not just from a national perspective. I do see we have a couple more questions. I will keep an eye on time, but please, can we have the next question over there?
Hello everyone, I'm Renata from Latvia, and I'm project coordinator of Youth Dialogue in Latvia, and I actually have two questions, but I will ask the one. Okay. So keeping in mind that we all skipped the second question, leading question, maybe it is possible to have some best practices collection, because it was very, very important. For example, right now when there was changes needed for mental health support, for example, in Latvia, we could share already what we have. So I think it was so crucial actually to have this second question, to know what's already existing, to take the good examples from other countries, and then maybe there wouldn't be like changes needed because it's already existing. It's just we don't have no information about this. Okay, and then I think that we really should stick to youth dialogue methodology also in the conferences. So I think there has been such a great effort from researchers, and why don't we stick to that also in the conferences? It would be so much helpful and meaningful afterwards. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would say, well, speaking about the methodology, that is always kind of process I already suggested or outlined, that it really depends on the objectives, and these objectives are always defined by a given member state that is the presidency country. and then we kind of model the methodology so that we get to the objectives. As for the question number 2, it really focused on the existing structures and the existing mechanisms, and you are completely correct that none of the working groups chose to tackle that particular question. And I think it demonstrates very well the barrier in terms of information that we to some extent are facing. It's simply that you as participants of the working groups felt much stronger in identifying the barriers and identifying the changes needed, but perhaps the information about what is already out there is not the strong suit. I would think that there are 2 things I would like to comment on. I mean, first of them is today there is a great opportunity to figure out what is out there. Your DGs are here, they are quite knowledgeable as to what concrete structures are in different member states and what could actually help to tackle inclusion on the national levels. And also, when you then take it forward, to also have a debate as to how the European Union could support all of us so that the inclusion is supported in all member states. And the second one would be that I already mentioned the national consultations which are taking place at the moment. And I believe that there is potential to also focus on this second guiding questions a bit more over there. Perhaps also in terms of one of the upcoming conferences. But at this, again, not my call to make. I can make a suggestion, but the decision will then also be made by the upcoming trial country.
For the DGs, to maybe give you some context on where the question comes from, during the conference we had 5 working group sessions, and as you've seen we have 3 main guiding questions for the consultation phase plus the additional one on the youth field, and because of the time constraints, group were encouraged to prioritize 2 out of the 3 guiding questions, and by incident actually all of the groups, without having any sort of coordination, they all, or most of all, decided to prioritize question number 1 and question number 3. So that's where this question comes from. And during the next session, during the dialogue session, actually in the first guiding question, we actually encourage you to share best practices. So this will be a moment to maybe catch up on that. So it's great that you asked that. I would say one final question before we move on to explaining the instructions. But of course, if you have questions, Ongrush, I would say it's still okay to reach out to you, and of course also to discuss with anybody else. Can we have a microphone over there?
My name is Lucas, and I'm from the National Danish Youth Council. I just wanted to know which mechanisms we have to look at what implementation of our recommendations and conversations will take place going forward, because I think the most important part of having these consultations in the form of the youth conference is actually that our conversations leaves these rooms and are implemented in European policy making. So do we have any tools for follow-up and evaluation of implementation of our recommendations?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that the next format session has specifically the objective, and I will also introduce that to you in a moment, to think about how we can actually move forward. And I've stressed that before during the conference that you as delegates, you are in the special position that we also need you to continue to follow up on the outcomes of the conference. So to not have the conference report just be saved or stored somewhere in your computer or put in a shelf and there it rests. No, but we actually need to think about how can we as INGOs, as youth organizations, as youth delegates, as national youth councils, as well as the ministries, collaborate and work together on the implementation of these recommendations. But of course, we also need a level of dialogue on European level. And this is your chance now during the next session to discuss that with the DGs and to come up with possible ideas and to share how this could actually be done. But maybe you have also something to add from previous cycles.
You have summarized it so brilliantly that I basically have nothing to add, really.
Okay.
I mean, there's always also national working groups, but then they also consist of all the bodies that you have mentioned already, which then in the upcoming phase of the cycle will be invited to implement different measures.
There is no one-size-fits-all solution, but as we've seen in the introduction of the trio presidency, the Belgians are already quite committed to continue the work on the outcomes of this conference. And as you know, after the consultation phase, the implementation phase follows, where specific recommendations on how can we take actions are developed. And this is the moment where we will look back at the conference outcomes, but also at the outcomes from the overall consultation phase, and then discuss together in Ghent how we can move forward from there. I'm very sorry to not be able to take more questions, but in order to leave you with enough time and space to discuss, I would now like to continue with the introductions of the methodology. Thank you again, Andras.
Thank you very much.
So, I told you the question is, how can we move forward with these great outcomes? To discuss this and other questions, we will have, I would say, a rather long dialogue moment of approximately 1 hour, where the DGs, together with all delegates of the conference, as well as the INGYOs, have the possibility to discuss in the format of a World Café. I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with the World Café. Maybe you've organized one yourself, maybe you've participated in one, but still, if you're new to it, I want to briefly introduce you to how it works. First of all, the World Café is not going to take place in here, but we will go upstairs where the breakfast takes place and be able to go outside as well. So it will be at the plaza where usually the coffee has been served, quite fitting for the World Café, so we will be there. There are some standing tables. We also have the room that is directly next to the plaza where also some tables will be, so we can spread and discuss there together while having some fresh air and enjoy Alicante, the nice air and view of Alicante. In the World Café, we have 3 rounds of discussions. Each round lasts 20 minutes approximately. We will give you a signal when it's time to move on. In every round, we will focus on a different guiding question. So everybody will be discussing the same question in round number 1, then we move to round number 2, and so on. We want to encourage you to change table and to mix and match so that we again can exchange as diverse perspectives as possible, especially also when we look at experiences, best practices from member states. We really want to encourage you to try to speak to people you haven't been, for instance, in a working group yet, and so on. The only people that will remain at the World Café table are the DGs as well as the hosts of the World Café. So the hosts will, together with the DGs, kind of host the discussion. For the DGs, you can find your table by looking for your member state flag. So there should be at least 1, maybe even 2 DGs per table, and the hosts, which are our lovely facilitators, as well as Alice and Nicolas, who are guests of the conference, who will support us in the facilitation of this discussion. But still, this is a dialogue that is being steered and being designed by you, basically. So the guiding questions are recommendations to kind of kick off the dialogue, but you are open to discuss whatever you find most relevant in the situation. We want you to take as much out of this dialogue as possible. This means for your personal backgrounds, for your work, for the areas where you can really have an impact. So, as I've said, the main goal of the World Café is to have great conversations, to have an open and transparent dialogue. So we want to encourage you to give honest feedback. If, for instance, you as DGs feel like a certain idea is great, but just not feasible, then we encourage you to elaborate on that, because this is what we are looking for. We are not trying to build, to say in English, we're not trying to build imaginary castles of what Europe could look like, but we actually want to develop precise and concrete steps which we can take to promote inclusion. So we want everybody to be honest and to exchange and to contribute to benefit from this open dialogue. Let me check if I've missed anything important that I wanted to tell you. I don't think so. So here are some general tips on how a good World Café works. First of all, listen actively to one another. And that seems quite obvious when you have a dialogue, but let me tell you from experience, it is not. Try to not just listen to what people say, but try to reflect how this connects to your reality from your member states, and try to build up on each other's idea. So if somebody talks about, for instance, inclusion in education, don't jump to employment directly, but try to actually have a good conversation flow where you can really dive into several aspects of the World Café. We have time constraints, yes, but I believe that 20 minutes allows you at least to have some more in-depth discussions than we usually do have at such conference formats. Ask open-ended questions, so don't look for yes and no answers, and also don't look for promises. We're not here to make false promises, but again, we're here to create ideas on how we can move forward. And the facilitators or the World Café hosts, they are not there to protocol or to take notes, but as you know, with the World Café, everybody has a flip chart, and you're all, not everybody, the table has a flip chart, and you're all encouraged to write or doodle on that flip chart. So you have the ownership of capturing the findings of this World Café. And, of course, for every World Café, there has to be café and snacks. So during the whole session, we will have a coffee bar in the room Cadiz. It's a room with a beautiful view. And so that we don't lose you during the discussion because you are so much looking forward to coffee, you always have the possibility to go, to grab a coffee, and to come back to your table. So please, this is actually kind of taking the coffee table discussions you usually have to an actual format. So don't stick to the coffee room and have your own little conversations there, but really try to participate and to engage in the dialogue. Hopefully at your table you will also find some snacks or sweets. If not there, then some other place. So now you might be wondering, what are the guiding questions? Can I have everybody's attention? I know they're a bit small, but you will also have the guiding questions on your table. The hosts will guide you through them. For round number 1, and we tried to develop these guiding questions to, on the one hand, give you the possibility to discuss the outcomes of the conference, but on the other hand, to add even more things, to have a space to add things that haven't had the chance to be discussed during the conference. For instance, the best practices you just mentioned, but also to connect to the DG agenda. So it was quite difficult to find a good balance, but again, they're just guiding you. You can also discuss other things you are interested in. So for round number 1, the question is, what are the key barriers that hinder youth inclusion in Europe? And that's the most important part. How can we collectively overcome them through national and European actions? So the question is, how can European policies enable changes on national level, but also how can the European level learn from national or benefit from national actions and policies? So we're looking for that connection as well. So for this question, we encourage you to share ideas and recommendations during the conference, especially your favorite ideas, which you feel like are very feasible and should be put into action as soon as possible, but also to maybe exchange best practices from your member states so that others can learn from that as well. For round number 2, we are going to discuss how can we make sure that the perspectives and the needs of all young people are at the heart of national and European policy making. So that's rather a broad question that also allows you to discuss youth participation, because I know the DGs will also be discussing, for instance, youth tests during their meeting. So this can be a space where you can already get some ideas on feedback from the youth delegates. And last but not least, how can all of us actively contribute to the effective implementation of the conference and cycle outcomes and foster stronger collaboration in advancing youth inclusion in Europe? And that's basically the question our Danish colleague has just raised. What can we now do to help put these recommendations into action? What should we do when we return back home, when we leave the cycle? What actions can we take? Are there any questions from your side on the World Café format? Or is everything clear for you? Just to summarize again, we will have 3 rounds for discussion. DGs will remain at their table. You will find your tables by your flags. All other delegates, as well as the Commission, the OECD representatives, everybody else, you are free to wander around to join the discussion. You change tables every round, and the hosts are there to support you. 2 last things before we conclude. We also have a great team of harvesters. Not just Andras has been creating the outcomes of the conference or summarizing the outcomes of the conference, but the harvesters have been supporting him. And the harvesters will be roaming around and they will collect quotes from you. They will not be anonymous, but they will also not use your name, but the quotes will be something like, the German youth delegate said ABZ. And these quotes from very nice conversation snippets will be included in the conference report as well as in the consultation report, because they show quite well how the discussions have been going, what people really put at the core of the discussion. And final thing, at the end of the World Café, you will have 10 minutes to identify an inspirational spark. So that is one thing from your table that you are taking away from the discussion. It can be anything, a best practice, an idea, maybe it's also just a very nice dialogue you had, anything really. Why are we looking for these inspirational sparks? Because of course in the plenary later on we also want to know what you've been talking about without going through all the discussions. So we will have 15 tables, so we want to hear 15 inspirational sparks in the end at the plenary before we conclude the conference. Last chance to ask any questions. Okay, seems to be all clear. Then I would please ask everybody to move to the plaza space, don't have a coffee break, take a coffee, go to a table, delegates can choose freely, DGs look for their table, the hosts will welcome you. Enjoy the dialogue.